Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe. Relation Tales. I had a normal life up to a certain point. What is friendship for you? For me, friendship is when I can rely on a person and be sure that he will not let me down. It's when I'm in trouble and a friend will always come to my rescue. That's what friendship is in my understanding. But friendship ends the moment a friend starts looking at your wife. My name is Sean and I am a mechanic. My life revolves around cars, especially one in particular, a vintage Mustang that my father gifted me on my 18th birthday. It's not just any car, it's a part of me, a reminder of home, of who I am. My wife Helen is a librarian and a college student. We've been together for 3 years, and in that time we've never had a serious argument. In our free time, we enjoy walking in the park, watching movies, and occasionally meeting up with friends, with whom we might go to a club or sit in a bar. But there's one but: our sex life. I know that Helen wants more than I can give her. My job is physically exhausting, and by the evening I'm often too tired, which frequently upsets her. I try not to pay attention to the disappointment in her eyes, but it's hard. On the other hand, I understand that if I stop working, we'll have nothing to eat. My friends comprise a unique bunch. Carlos, a couple of years my junior, is currently in college. He's a fitness enthusiast, always hitting the gym, and thrives on being the center of attention. Then there's Amber, Helen's close friend from high school, along with her boyfriend, Fred. While Fred and I aren't particularly close, our girlfriends keep us connected, and he generally doesn't bother me much. It all began with a call from Carlos, proposing a weekend getaway to a lake resort to unwind from the hustle and bustle of the city. The idea sounded appealing, but I decided to run it by Helen first. When Helen returned home that evening, I intended to share the news with her, only to discover she was already aware of the plan. This revelation left me feeling cautious. Carlos had never called her directly before. Why did he do it this time? Helen was thrilled with the idea and insisted we go. She said it would be a great opportunity to relax together, especially since Fred could drive us in his big old SUV, which could fit 5 people and a bunch of stuff. In the following days, I couldn't stop thinking about the upcoming trip. Helen had already started planning what we would take with us, and her excitement was infectious. We sat in the kitchen, surrounded by maps and guidebooks she had found at the library where she worked. "This is going to be great, Sean," she said, genuinely smiling. I couldn't disagree with her. Her optimism had always been my support. That evening, as we were having dinner, I noticed Helen was increasingly distracted by her phone. She explained. I nodded, trying to hide my irritation. It's not that I didn't trust Carlos, but his sudden interest in my wife seemed odd to me. Why didn't he write to me? The following day, Helen and I set out for shopping. We needed to buy everything necessary for the trip, mainly bathing suits and food and drinks. Helen was in her element, selecting the best and most comfortable items. But what especially amazed me was her new swimsuit, which was very revealing. I barely managed to restrain myself from getting too close to her right in the changing room. "We're only going to be there for a couple of days, Helen. Not a month," I joked, watching her carefully pick out items. She just smiled sweetly in response and continued her search. On the way home, we discussed the trip plan. Fred agreed to take us in his SUV, which was a big plus. "Everything will be perfect, Sean. You'll see," Helen said, holding my hand. I hoped she was right. The day before the trip, we packed all our stuff and loaded it into the car. Carlos and Fred came to us quite early to avoid the morning traffic jams. Amber, in turn, was already waiting for us in the car, eager to start our little adventure. While we were driving, Helen was constantly chatting with Amber and the guys, and I felt a bit left out. Not that I minded, I was just absorbed in my thoughts. It seemed to me that I'd forgotten something important, left something significant unsaid. But looking at Helen, happy and carefree, made those thoughts recede. When we arrived at the destination, I was struck by the beauty of the surrounding nature. The recreation base turned out to be a real secluded paradise. The cabin we got was on the shore of a lake, and the balcony offered a magnificent view of the mountains. "How do you like it?" Helen asked, hugging me by the waist. "It's wonderful," I replied. And at that moment, I truly thought so. We spent the rest of the day at the lake swimming and enjoying the sun. In the evening, sitting by the fire, I looked at Helen and thought about how much this person means to me. All my doubts and fears seemed so distant and unimportant, but the night brought restlessness with it. Helen was tossing and turning in bed and I pretended to be asleep, watching her. When she got up and left the room, I thought she was just going to the bathroom. So I just lay there, waiting. It felt like about 30 minutes had passed and Helen returned to bed. "What happened, dear?" I asked. "Oh, Sean, you're not asleep. I just went to the bathroom. Probably shouldn't have eaten that cheese," she said, and that reassured me. And eventually we fell asleep in each other's arms. Waking up early in the morning, the first thing I felt was the cold, fresh air seeping through the slightly open window. I turned to Helen. She was sleeping peacefully, and tranquility was evident on her face. I decided not to wake her and went out to the balcony. The view from there was truly mesmerizing. Mountains wrapped in morning mist gently rose above the calm surface of the lake. I breathed in the cool air, trying to shake off the remnants of the night's anxiety. The day promised to be eventful. When everyone woke up, we gathered in the kitchen for breakfast. Helen was full of energy and suggested spending the day at the lake. Her enthusiasm quickly spread to the rest of us, and we happily agreed. Amber and Fred were already ready for new adventures, and Carlos seemed eager to finally get on the water. Carlos, as per his usual style, flaunted his chiseled physique, strutting around shirtless, showcasing his toned arms and abs for all to admire. Following breakfast, we made our way to the lake. I noticed Helen and Carlos exchanging whispers, but opted not to read too much into it. Perhaps they were simply discussing our plans for the day on the water. I didn't want to spoil the atmosphere over trivial matters, neither for myself nor for anyone else. The lake was breathtakingly beautiful, its crystal clear waters revealing every pebble at its depths. Renting a boat, we set out for a swim, aiming for the heart of the lake to leap into the water from its edges. The sun beamed down warmly, while a gentle breeze offered respite from the heat. Helen's laughter filled the air, her playful banter lighting up the moment. I found myself captivated by her, forgetting the world around me. The sunlight danced upon her skin, casting a radiant glow that left me momentarily spellbound. We plunged into the water, reveling in every moment of our aquatic escapade. Helen's joy was infectious, and witnessing her happiness was all I needed to feel content. As the day drew to a close, we decided to cap it off with a barbecue. Carlos assumed the role of head chef, orchestrating the grill, while Fred and I took charge of the preparations. Amber and Helen adorned the tables with decorations and laid out snacks, adding to the festive ambience. Everything was going perfectly, and I felt like I was part of something bigger, something important. But when night fell and everyone began to retreat to their own rooms, my unease returned. Helen was acting oddly again, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on between her and Carlos. I went to bed, but due to my severe fatigue and sunburn, my eyes quickly closed, and I fell asleep. I don't remember if Helen was asleep at that moment, but I hoped she hadn't gone anywhere. The next morning came too soon. My eyes opened even before the first rays of sun pierced through the curtains. The night was restless, and I frequently woke up, listening to the silence occasionally broken only by the sound of the lake. Helen seemed calm, but her unusual behavior from the previous night still troubled me. After breakfast, which was in a light and relaxed atmosphere, I noticed Helen frequently exchanging glances with Carlos. I wanted to think I was exaggerating, but those small moments made me doubt. We decided to go for a walk in the forest surrounding our retreat. The forest was dense and cool, filled with the sounds of nature. Amber and Fred walked ahead, chatting cheerily, while Helen and I followed with Carlos. It seemed to me there was some invisible attraction between them that I couldn't ignore. On the way back to the house, Helen took my hand and smiled, as if trying to assure me that everything was fine. I responded with a smile, trying to dispel my anxious thoughts. In the evenings, we arranged an outdoor movie screening. Fred found an old projector, and we settled on the grass with popcorn and blankets. Everything seemed perfect, but I still felt a tension in the air. After the movie, when everyone started heading off to sleep, Helen said she would go for a walk. "I need some fresh air," she explained. I offered to go with her, but she insisted on being alone. Her words sounded convincing, but I couldn't shake off a feeling of anxiety. Lying in bed and listening to the house absorb the night's silence, I couldn't fall asleep. Thoughts of Helen, her strange nocturnal wanderings, and the exchanged glances with Carlos kept me awake. I decided I had to figure this out as soon as she returned. When Helen came back an hour later, she tried to be quiet, but I was already sitting up in bed, waiting. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to hide the concern in my voice. She nodded. "All's well. I was just sitting by the lake. Today was such a busy day, my head spinning." Her words didn't sound convincing to me, but I invited her to bed and, out of decency, attempted to be intimate with her. "Sean, let's not right now. It's late and I'm not feeling well," she said, and that upset me. I turned away from her and lay down to sleep. 20 minutes later, I felt Helen trying to wake me up. Sean, are you asleep?" she said. But I decided not to respond, and she repeated the same thing about 10 minutes later. But I also didn't give her an answer. Then she got up and went out the door, and I heard footsteps down the staircase. She was going downstairs. The house was 2-storied. On the second floor there were 2 rooms, one for us with Helen, the other for Amber and Fred, while Carlos slept downstairs on a soft fold-out couch. After lying in bed for about 15 minutes, I decided to leave my room and check where Helen had been disappearing to for so long. Carefully opening the door, I found myself in the corridor, and on my haunches, I started crawling towards the staircase to listen to what was happening downstairs. Through the silence, I heard Helen's faint moans, as if something was covering her mouth. Then I started carefully descending the stairs and got a full view. As I descended the stairs, wanting to remain unnoticed, I took my phone with me, having dimmed its brightness to the minimum beforehand. I extended the phone downwards, wanting to take a quick photo, and pressing the button, I realized I had forgotten to turn off the flash, which exposed my presence. The room was dark, but moonlight streaming through the window illuminated their silhouettes. They turned around towards me, like guilty children caught stealing cookies. The world around ceased to exist. I went down even further. All I saw were Helen and Carlos. Helen sitting on Carlos, covered only by a thin blanket. I couldn't utter a word. My breathing quickened, and I felt anger filling every cell of my body. Carlos tried to say something, throwing Helen off him and moving towards me, raising his hands in a gesture of peace, but that only fueled my rage. I didn't listen to him. When he came too close to me, I reflexively struck him in the face, causing him to fall to the ground. Helen started to cry, whispering my name, but her tears like drops of acid only intensified my pain. I took a step back, trying to gather my thoughts. Everything inside me screamed in pain and betrayal. My wife, my love, was with another. My friend. I felt the world I had built around us crumbling before my eyes. "How could you?" I said. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. It's just that we haven't had sex in so long. And Carlos was so manly and handsome," she said. "Do you realize what you are telling your husband? He's handsome. Are you aware that he only got that physique thanks to pills?" I said. "I'm sorry," she said, trying to stand up and come towards me. "Don't come any closer to me. I see you didn't even use protection, right?" I asked. "I'm guilty, forgive me," she said. "And you probably weren't aware that Carlos has a venereal disease, right?" I asked. And Carlos indeed had a disease, known only to me. He shared this with me a year and a half ago, and I kept this information secret. But if I had known he would want my wife, of course, I would have warned Helen about it in advance. "Wait, are you joking?" she began, with fear in her eyes. "No, dear, you're in deep trouble. Now answer me one question. How long ago was your first time? Be honest," I asked. "The very first day we got here," she said. "Phew, at least that's something good," I said. Helen was sobbing, and I didn't even notice that Amber and Fred had come down due to the noise and were witnessing the whole scene. "Sit on the bed, do you understand?" I disclosed the news to Helen, tossing the wedding ring in her direction, causing it to graze her forehead, eliciting a yelp of pain. As she cried out, I made my way toward the exit, feeling the urgent need to escape. Stepping outside, I inhaled deeply, seeking solace in the cool night air. Though the sky was adorned with stars, their shimmer felt distant and devoid of warmth. That night marked the loss of everything dear to me, leaving only a hollow ache in my chest and a mere semblance of my former self. From the house, I heard commotion, witnessing Carlos roused from slumber, engaging in a heated exchange with Fred. In a fit of rage, Fred struck Carlos, sending him crashing to the ground. Amused by the scene, I couldn't help but smirk. Soon after, Fred approached me, suggesting we convene at the kitchen table to address the situation. Following his lead, we settled down, and I divulged all that I had discovered and pondered. They listened intently as I poured out my thoughts and emotions, allowing me the space to articulate the turmoil within. Meanwhile, Helen sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face, attempting to interject, only to be silenced by my insistence for her to remain quiet. As Fred inquired about my next course of action, I shook my head, grappling with the shattered remnants of my plans and dreams for a future with Helen, now irrevocably shattered. "I don't know," was all I could manage to say. Amber took my hands. "We're with you, Sean. Whatever you decide to do, we'll support you. No one could have imagined this happening." Her words were like balm to my wounds. At that moment I realized that despite all the pain, I was not alone. I knew we couldn't delay and had to teach them a lesson at least. Amber and Fred went upstairs to pack their things while I looked after Carlos, who was alive, and that made me happy. Helen watched from the couch as Fred and Amber brought down bags of belongings. "Yes, but there's only room for 3 in the car. You and Carlos will have to make your own way," I suggested. "It took us 5 hours by car to get here. How do you expect us to get back to the city?" "Are you joking?" she said indignantly. "It wasn't hard for you to sneak down the stairs every night. So what's the problem getting to the city with your macho?" I asked. "Does this mean it's over between us?" She asked. "No, I just arranged all this for fun," I said sarcastically. "Honey, stop, we'll make up. It was a misunderstanding." "You yourself said that making mistakes is useful," she said. "Firstly, I'm not your honey anymore. And secondly, I don't want to talk to you," I said. And at that moment, Fred brought down the last bag and we went outside, locking the door behind us, leaving Helen and Carlos alone, locked in the house surrounded by the forest. We loaded the stuff into the SUV and got in the car. Amber asked if it wasn't too cruel to leave them there alone. I replied, "They'll stay here alone. Not only locked in the house but also needing to pay the remaining amount for the house, and they have no money." Fred laughed. We had only paid half for the house. The next half was due upon departure, and I had left Helen without any money. Moreover, the signal was bad here and there was no internet, but they would still be found since the lake house owners were supposed to return tomorrow. We were driving and decided to discuss my next steps. I determined that the first order of business would be to consult a lawyer and start the divorce process. Amber offered her help, mentioning that she knew a good specialist who could assist me. Fred added that it was also important to take care of my emotional state and offered several contacts of professional psychologists. I declined the psychologist but took down the lawyer's contact. Upon returning home in the morning, I immediately prepared the documents attaching a photo taken last night. Since the photo was taken with a flash, everything was clearly visible. I also blocked our joint electronic accounts to prevent Helen from accessing the funds. I changed the locks on the house and installed an alarm system just in case. I also began gathering Helen's belongings and found a pack of condoms we never used and $15,000 in cash in her winter jacket. I was tempted to take the money but decided to leave it in the jacket and tossed it into her bag, not wanting to take anything from a despicable person. Throughout the day I gathered all of Helen's things and left them outside the door. The porch was cluttered with her belongings. I didn't care if someone came and stole her things. That was not my problem. What comforted me was that the house was entirely mine, gifted by my parents before my marriage to Helen, so she couldn't claim it. 4 days later, Helen returned to town with Carlos, and they headed straight for my house. I was at work at the time and received a notification that someone was trying to break into my house, with security forces arriving within minutes. I laughed out loud when I went to the police station in the evening and saw the two of them sitting in a cell. At the police station, I confirmed that Helen was my wife, but a court case was pending, and she would soon be my ex. When the security arrived at my house, they saw a man with a bat and a woman trying to break in. They were caught and jailed for a few days. And now Carlos had to buy me a new window. At the police station, I made it clear to him to stay away from me. A month later, the first court session took place. The divorce process was complex and emotionally draining. Helen tried to contact me several times, but I realized that for our mutual good, we needed to give each other space. Meetings with the lawyer and the police took a lot of energy. I got tested for sexually transmitted diseases and fortunately tested negative, unlike Helen, who tested positive, putting Carlos at risk of jail time for engaging in unprotected intimacy, especially since he regularly missed taking his medication. But I didn't care about that. What mattered most was that I was healthy. The hardest part was realizing that life without Helen would be completely different. We had spent so much time together that her absence felt like a missing piece of me. But with each passing day I learned to accept this, focusing on building a new life. Amber and Fred became my pillars during this difficult period. They were always there when times were tough, helping me look forward. Their friendship reminded me that despite all losses, there are still people who love and support me. Gradually, I began to find solace in the little things: evening walks, reading books I had long wanted to read, and even work, which helped me distract myself. I started to rediscover the pleasure of solitude, finding in it not only sadness but also an opportunity for self-development. One day, sitting by the river and watching the sunset, I realized that despite all the pain and loss, new horizons were unfolding before me. Life after Helen would be different, but that didn't mean it would be worse. I began to feel ready to meet it with an open heart, ready for new challenges and opportunities it would bring. With each new day, I began to feel a bit different. I wouldn't say it was easier. That's not the right term. Rather, I became more focused, finding in myself the strength to look into the future without fear and regret. Amber and Fred continued to support me, and their friendship was the anchor that kept me from sinking into despair. My morning walks became a kind of ritual. I walked along the riverbank, contemplating what I wanted to change in my life. I realized that I wanted to spend more time on myself, my hobbies and interests that had been forgotten. One day, sitting in a cafe and sipping coffee, I felt truly calm for the first time after everything that had happened. I opened a notebook and began to list all the things I had always wanted to do but had postponed. The list was long, from trips I wanted to take to skills I wanted to learn. I suddenly realized that the world around me remained full of opportunities, even if one chapter of my life had been turned. Returning to work was another step forward. I discovered that my passion for cars had not faded. On the contrary, I began to invest even more enthusiasm in it, seeing it not just as a job, but as a way of self-expression. My old Mustang, which seemed to me a reminder of the past, now filled me with a sense of pride and achievement. The most difficult part was learning to trust people again. Meeting new people, interacting with colleagues wasn't always easy, but I gradually learned to open up to the world, understanding that not all stories end like mine with Helen. Helen herself is to blame for getting infected and now lives in some tiny room in another state, her life not turning out well. She didn't finish college and quit her job. Her affair brought her nothing, and she's to blame for that. The person I once considered a friend is in prison, And it's his fault too. I did nothing wrong to these people. They chose their path, and I just helped them end up where they should be. The main thing is to keep your sanity and believe in the best. Thank you for listening to my story. That concludes the narrative. We eagerly await your feedback in the comments section. Do you believe the protagonist made the correct choice by opting for an immediate divorce from his wife? What are your thoughts on the wife's friend and her boyfriend aligning with the protagonist? What motivated the protagonist's friend to betray him by pursuing his wife? And why do you think the wife engaged in infidelity? Please share your insights and opinions below. Second story. I didn't cheat, but I think my ex did. Bear with me, as this is a lengthy tale. To avoid confusion, it's essential to note that I was diagnosed with juvenile arthritis in 6th grade, and by 7th grade, it had spread. Now, in 8th grade, this condition ties into the story. At the end of January last year, I, a 13-year-old male, confessed my feelings to River, who is approximately 14 years old. River and I had been friends for quite some time. Despite my apprehensions, I divulged my affection for them. They had recently ended a tumultuous relationship and had already dated several individuals. To my relief, River reciprocated my feelings, and we commenced a relationship. Around this time last year, we embarked on a trip together for my birthday. Understandably, given our age, my parents accompanied us. We journeyed to a mall a couple of hours away and thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. However, the joyous occasion took a somber turn when my dad experienced excruciating pain and was hospitalized. Witnessing his distress, unable to walk and in tears, was distressing. After admitting him to the hospital, we eventually returned home around 1 a.m., following a prolonged ordeal. Unfortunately, a week or so later, my dad found himself hospitalized once again. He had to go to a hospital 4 hours away, and I was basically left to babysit my 8-year-old brother. I went through a really hard time, and at one point turned to SH. I did it on my leg where I thought nobody would see it. However, of course, around the time my mom was able to leave my dad alone in the hospital, my arthritis decided to spread to the knee that I did that on. I told River and they didn't seem to care. They said, "Well, I do that all the time. Ike, what you want me to say? Just figure it out, lol," and eventually made jokes about their own cuts. It disgusted me, but I said nothing. I covered up the cuts and showed my mom my swollen arthritic knee, and all was well. As time went on, me and River's relationship became less and less of a relationship. They seemed fine around other people, but they would hardly answer my texts or my calls. Their texts would basically just say K, Ike, GN, etc. Here's the interesting part. One day, they went to my distant cousin James's house because the two of them had always been close friends. They weren't answering my calls or texts and I didn't think much of it. And I started basically spamming them with stories from before we started dating and cute Pinterest couples. I was still so happy to be with them. After a few hours of not answering, they finally texted me back, something along the lines of, "I can't talk RN. I kept itching my scars and my cuts and now James is laying on my arm so I can't itch anymore. He's so sweet." That's when I started to get weirded out. They were definitely the kind to cheat, thinking back. And they just recently cheated on a boy that would do anything for them. Anyways, they stopped answering again and a few hours later, they messaged me out of nowhere. They told me that they still liked me or whatever but couldn't be with me because we were two trans guys in an MLM relationship and I wasn't out to my parents. I didn't understand. They told me so many times that they were fine with this and that it didn't matter. They had seemed just fine a few days before at school. They knew that if my dad found out that I was still using he/him pronouns socially, he might kick me out of the house, and they knew that if he did, I wouldn't have a place to stay. After they broke up with me, they stopped talking to me altogether. They told several people that they were ghosting me on purpose. They immediately dated another person, broke up with him after about a week. Then a girl, broke up with her, then 2 other guys. They moved on really quick. I still don't know whether or not they really cheated on me, but it does seem likely, and that was the rumor going around school. Thanks for joining us on this chapter of Relation Tales. If you were moved by these stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Don't miss out on the upcoming emotional roller coaster of relationships. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to share more compelling tales with you. Until next time, remember, every relationship has a story worth telling. See you soon.